Hi, welcome to Beyond My Crisis. I'm your co-host, Ron Rosnick.
And I'm Vivian Gaspar. Here we are at Beyond My Crisis. And so many people think that when their aging parents start getting to a point where they either need assistance while they're at home or perhaps they're in a facility. And then when they think just that is the crisis that they had to overcome, then unfortunately will hit the potential for elder guardianship abuse. And here with us today, unfortunately, is an expert, but not by choice, but by circumstance. Here's Juliette Fairley. And Juliette Fairley is a business and finance reporter who has written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and many other publications. She began writing about elder guardianship fraud after her military veteran father became a victim of fraudulent elder guardianship in San Antonio, Texas. Welcome, Juliette, and thank you so much for coming to educate our viewers on this topic that so many people have never even heard of. So tell us, what role does a family dysfunction play in court-appointed guardianships?
Well, in my case and many other cases, a family member will go to the court, the probate court, for help in handling the care of an elderly loved one because another family member may be neglecting the loved one, or there may be instances where one family member is not allowing another family member to see the elderly loved one. So inevitably the advice that you get if you go to an attorney, or in my case I went to the Veterans Administration, the patient advocacy program, and they said go to the court, you're going to have to file for guardianship.
And what did you find to be the best option? Instead of going to court, what could you have done?
Well, I don't know if, you could try to work with the family member, and that would be ideal. But in this case, the family member was unwilling to change some of the practices that were going on, such as pulling my father's teeth instead of having the cavities filled, delaying delivering his blood pressure medication, which he needs to stay alive and to prevent a heart attack. And so the family member was not willing to change their behavior. And so in that instance, what you could do, looking back, is go to a lawyer and try to get a lawyer to settle it without going to court. But most lawyers are going to want to go to court because they want to get you into this, because that's where they can get your money.
But what would be the motivation for someone to perpetrate such? It's not even the fraud portion of it, because
predatory.
What you're just, it's, but
Tactics.
what? Because is there a financial angle?
Yes,
We haven't even gotten into that part yet.
Yes, usually what's behind it is an attempt to accelerate the death of the elderly person.
So the motivation is to have that elderly person die sooner so they can get the money faster or more money?
Probably faster. So like if there's an insurance policy, if there's a benefits you can get through the VA, or if there's benefits through retirement. I mean, this older generation had benefits. They have benefits that don't exist today. So some of these elderly people from the World War II generation are cash cows.
Right, and they have their homes fully paid for. Some people do reverse mortgages to cash out their home during their elderly years. What do you suggest people do to protect from an event like that?
Well, what's interesting is it's very challenging because as you age, my father did make choices, but you can't really predict what's going to happen in the end. You don't know if the person that you choose is actually going to look out for you, and that's what happened in my case. Is that the person that he left in charge has such a financial gain that there became a conflict of interest.
So would vetting this person be helpful, like doing a criminal background? What can we do?
Usually it's a family member that you would never suspect would do something like this. If you would have told me that this family member who has done this to my father and I 10 or 15 years ago, that this would happen, I would say, oh no, this family member is not capable of that. This family member would never do that. Like you just, when people see dollar signs, sometimes it changes who they are.
So this is also a physical abuse to end up with their basically financial abuse as well. And so has this person kept you from being with your father to try to reverse any of this or even give him comfort?
This particular family member had filed a motion in the court to ban my visits.
What grounds would that occur?
Because I was interfering, because my advocacy was interfering. And it's like, I shouldn't, if you were doing the right thing, I wouldn't have to advocate.
So who prevailed?
The judge decided that she was going to allow the visits, that she would not grant that motion.
And what gave you that win? What did you do?
I think it was just the judge had a bit of a heart. I mean, what kind of judge is going to separate an old man or an old woman from their child? I mean, that is a cruel and barbaric thing to do. Already your parent is passing away, and then to have this happen to you where you can't be there to comfort them is very barbaric and very cruel. It's like, but it's happening to other people where they're being separated from their parents. In my particular case, the judge did not rule to separate us, which is good, but I'm only allowed to see him twice a month in person.
Why? Why isn't it more free access? Did the judge restrict it, or did this unfortunate guardian that was assigned restrict your access?
Okay, so there was a visiting judge from Galveston, Texas, who was not familiar with the case, and apparently had a private conference with the family member's attorney, and my attorney was not there. And that's when the order was drawn up.
So was there a trial date that your attorney did not show up to? Was your attorney negligent?
I don't know if it's attorney negligence, but it was like he wasn't there when the order was written out.
So if your attorney isn't there, typically what I understand the person does, rather than go pro se, which is to represent yourself, is to say, I can't proceed without my legal representation. We need a postponement.
The judge, Gladys Burwell from Galveston, it was her role to say, this is ex parte.
What does that mean, ex parte? A lot of people might not be familiar with that term.
Means there's decisions made or proceedings that go on where the opposing person's attorney is not present.
So would you highly recommend having legal representation like an attorney by your side?
Absolutely, but I wasn't there either. It was something that occurred between the Judge Gladys Burwell, the family member's attorney, and the court. And my attorney was not there.
Can this be overturned? Once your negative decision was made, how can it be fought? Can they overturn that? Can they amend it?
Well, at that point, they said I had to pay to see my dad. I was restricted in visitation because my family member's lawyer was there and my attorney was not there.
So you had a form of restraining order then, with supervised visitation.
Exactly. And my attorney should have been in that conference in the judge's chambers.
So you didn't want that motion to be vacated?
We appealed it twice, went to the appellate court, and they said, basically my constitutional rights were denied. My due process rights were denied. I was supposed to pay $20,000 in order to be heard in the court, in order to tell the court why this family member should not be the guardian and to present the evidence. And I was told I had to pay $20,000 in cash, which puts a price tag on due process.
Who initiated the fact that you'd have to pay? What did they call that fee?
That was, it's security for costs. So we appealed it.
It's like a bond of sorts.
Yes, exactly. But they required in the order that I pay it in cash. So I went and got new attorneys and we appealed it, and the appellate court said it was a harmless error. Harmless? It wasn't harmless. It offends my constitutional rights. It was not harmless.
How long did that prevent you from seeing your father? What period of time?
No, I could still see him, but only twice a month.
Well, that's what I mean. For how long were you restricted to that?
I'm still restricted.
Oh, that hasn't changed yet.
So what did you learn that you can advise our audience if they have an issue like this in the future?
Well, I would never go to the probate court, and
So if you don't go to the probate court, where do you go? What do you do? What's the action that they can take?
Well, I mean, it's really hard to say. If you do go to the probate court, ask to go to mediation. Now, there's no guarantee that you're going to be granted mediation, because we did request mediation, and the judge said no.
And mediation is held by attorneys that are volunteering
yes.
to settle this outside of a trial.
Yes. Exactly. And we did request that, and the judge denied it. So there's always there's always the risk that the judge is going to deny.
So if there's an inheritance involved, is that the money that motivated this unfortunate designation, the guardian who was appointed? Right, was that they were looking to accelerate the inheritance
Well,
to get access to the money?
He's still alive, and from what I understand, there is an estate with the Veterans Administration.
I see.
Because he was in 3 wars. And he's still alive. I'm still fighting for him. And this family member stands to gain a lot of money. They saved a lot. They saved a lot. Our family saved a lot. And the money that was put in a trust is gone. The family member took the money out of a trust. And there's still our house. And then there's this estate with the VA that is not paid out until his death. And then there's the money that was taken out of the bank account, which I don't know where it is.
So I hear a lot of problems. Any solutions to this?
I gotta tell you, I have just been so I don't know. I mean, if I could do it all over again, what would I do? Well, I tried to work it out with the family member. That wasn't happening. I don't know. I don't know what I could have done differently.
Do there advocacy groups that would assist someone?
Well, the advocacy groups, they're really, it's all legal. So that's where the challenge is it's legal. So even even if there's fraud or there's ex parte, or there's
what does ex parte mean?
Like I said, ex parte is you make a decision without all counsel, without all parties. Even if there's bias, even if the order didn't follow the law. And we took the order to the appellate court. And normally the appellate court would say, this doesn't follow the law, we're going to reverse it. But instead, they reinforced it, saying it was a harmless error, despite the fact that my due process rights were violated and my constitutional rights were violated. So when you're facing this kind of, I don't know if you want to say, is it corruption? I don't know what it is. I really can't put a word on it. Is it corruption? Is it bias? What is it? Well, where their law is not followed.
Right. So we've got a lot more questions than answers at this point. And I really thank you for this insight, because this seems like a very common event that's happening across the United States.
It's on the rise. You've got a lot, the boomers are now coming into that money that their parents are leaving them. Mm-hmm. They're also getting older. They're getting to the Alzheimer's stage. Mm-hmm. So what's happening to me is going to start happening on a mass level, because these lawyers and these courts are making a lot of money. And basically the probate court, they bill the estate. And where does the money go when they bill the estate? It goes to the state. So the governments have an interest.
Our next guest is an advocate, and we are going to have him discuss what someone can do, what recourse there is. And then hold on, because Juliette will return in conjunction with our next guest, Rick and Black, and we will see what else we can do. Stay tuned. And here we have with us, very fortunate, all the way from North Carolina, Rick Black, who is a volunteer director of the national nonprofit called the Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship. And they provide free services to educate the public about issues with guardianship, advocate for those being appointed into or involved involuntarily to guardianship, and lobby for probate reform legislation at the state and national level. Thank you so much, Rick, for coming all the way to our studios, because our audience definitely needs to learn from you and relate to what you've not only gone through in the past, but how you're working so very hard to help others, unfortunately, in your situation.
Thank you, Vivian. It's great to be here.
Welcome.
So, what is guardianship?
Guardianship, it's when the court gets involved in your life. Namely, it's called different things in different jurisdictions, but it's usually a probate court, sometimes called a family court. But it's when you turn to the court to give someone official, full control over your decisions, your rights, and your estate. And in all cases, it will involve lawyers and judges and state oversight with that ruling.
So this only happens when that family member is too old to take care of themselves, or they're incapacitated in some way.
That's correct, Ron, but it can happen to young adults as well as old. Someone, and sometimes it's quite arbitrary, can make the decision that you have become incapacitated due to injury or illness. Guardianships are usually focused on those with wealth. We see from time to time the lower income people, maybe with $50,000 of net worth, $20,000 of net worth.
Okay.
But the cost of a guardianship and the leverage gained from a guardianship, you normally see folks with a net worth of $100,000 to $10 million.
Got it.
What you had mentioned previously is a cottage industry of guardians being appointed who aren't even related to the individual in question.
Sadly, what we see is a broad diversity of engagement with law enforcement and designated elder protective services. There's the National Adult Protective Services Organization, which is a non-governmental organization that's funded by the federal government that works hand in hand at the county level and the state level to protect our elderly. Those over 65 are protected by a group called Elder Protective Services.
So people are trying to take advantage of these handicap or aging people. These are companies or family members or individuals. How much is this happening? How prevalent is this right now?
It's very prevalent. The National Center for State Courts, which is an organization in Williamsburg, Virginia, that was established as an ad hoc analyst of the actions that take place in the family and probate court system. They estimate that 1.3 million adults are under guardianship in the United States today, and roughly 85% of those are seniors, those over 65.
And how many are deemed predatory, where people are taking advantage of the financial
Our
aspect?
estimates within Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship is somewhere between 7 and 10% are actually done on a predatory basis to use guardianship to exploit the estate. It's originated in an involuntary basis with a predatory or fraudulent initiative.
And what percent of the estate could be diminished in that way?
A great question, Ron. When these efforts are taken on, their intent is to completely drain the estate. There's actually fallout here that your listeners need to be aware of, because their intent is to create conflict. Control of the body, dead or alive, is the essence of initiating the conflict, which then gets these parties into the court system. Once it starts, they will not let go until that estate has been completely drained.
Give us an example, please. What do you mean by conflict?
Like what has this happened to? Who?
Well, I'm a victim myself.
Is that why you got involved?
Absolutely. In summer of 2013, we discovered that my father-in-law, who had retired in Las Vegas, he had been living with a woman that we had all known for 30 years. They weren't married. They had segregated assets. That meaning she had her bank accounts, he had his bank accounts. She owned her home. He paid rent to her. She had a car. He had a car. And it's not a common law state. She stole $220,000 from him.
Did she do that?
Well, he had Alzheimer's,
I
and
see.
we didn't realize that we knew he was 80 years old and he was starting to slow down, but the Alzheimer's wasn't known. It had never been talked about. In fact, we found out later that she was doing a very good job of deceiving the family on really what was going on in Las Vegas. Fortunately, my father-in-law had prepared for his aging. He had put my wife on all of his bank accounts. She was the pay-on-death beneficiary of all of his assets. She was the executor of his will. And we had weekly contact with him via phone and spent at least a vacation a year with him. So we weren't estranged in any way.
So the protection mechanisms, repeat them again. It's
Well,
have a signer on the bank account.
In this case, it was joint holders on the bank accounts so that you can monitor those statements and understand
Electronically or
transactions. That's correct, electronically. It's be the executor of the will, have a will, number
Have a
one.
will or a
But
trust.
also, trusts are secondary and they're rather expensive to put together. You'll spend $2,000-$3,000 to put together a trust. And there's another weakness with trusts, Ron, that we got to be aware of, and I'll spend.
Let's talk about that in a
We'll
moment.
get that in a second. But executor on the will, 100% executor or beneficiary of that will. So it was very clear who my father-in-law trusted and who he expected his estate to go to.
Right.
In our case, after we determined the theft and went and called him and had a discussion about, hey, this money's missing, do you know what's going on, what has occurred? The landlord was eavesdropping in the discussion. She immediately started screaming at him, you brought that money out here for us, and then it eventually cascaded into, you come get your father, I'm done with him.
What about, did your wife have a power of attorney as well?
She did not.
Would that have helped the situation?
As it turned out, it would not.
Okay.
But it's
And-
good
and
to get if
it's
they're
a-
in
yeah, my
capacity.
guidance.
And a living will, of course.
Yeah, no, my guidance to anyone with aging parents is that you must get a durable power of attorney. And that gives you the ability to access their bank accounts, to make decisions for them if they have a traffic accident and they're injured or if they have illness. You also want to have a healthcare surrogate or an advance directive, healthcare power of attorney, so that when they become incapacitated, you as their designated loved one can make decisions about their health care. Oftentimes what we see in the court system is predatory parties will step in and say, well, really with the durable power of attorney, your loved one only trusted you to make financial decisions for them, but not medical decisions for them. They jump in as a guardian of the person, and then the fleecing begins through the court system.
How is this different in various states? Because I know you said this is not just state by state, but sometimes county by county. So are there any commonalities you can mention since we're seeing throughout the whole country?
Well, probate and family court is consistently designed across the country. How it is managed is very different. And that's where the problem comes in.
So can people do this on their own, like get these documents signed and notarized at their bank on their own, or should they be consulting a professional or your organization or an attorney? What's the...
My guidance on durable powers of attorney is that you go to an attorney and have them draft the agreements. You can easily get those agreements off the internet. There's plenty of forms. They're very, very standard. And you can go to the bank and get them notarized and executed.
So you don't have to have an attorney to assist
Right,
with
but the
this.
concern
That's correct.
But the concern I've had is some of these forms you get online, they're state clauses that may not survive a conflict. So if you get online documents, how do you know it's ironclad, it's written properly for your state or county?
Ron, it's a great comment, and that's why I recommend go to an attorney. My caution to your listeners, though, is elder law attorneys is an area with a lot of latitude, and it's sort of the Wild West. And the thing that I see too often is family members will go to an elder law attorney to have them draft up a trust agreement or a durable power of attorney agreement. They don't really understand what it should say. They put their full trust in an attorney, and then the attorney drafts an agreement that allows him to step in as a guardian should something happen down the road. So you really want to get yourself educated with a lawyer, but also do a lot of comparison with peers to understand exactly
Right.
what your risk reward is.
So learning this, is there a book that you would recommend or a website?
I don't. My recommendation is to go to our website, which is Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship,
Americans Against
AAPG.
Abusive Home Guardian.
Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship
Okay.
.net.
.net.
AAAPG.net.
Okay, so I need to ask, since obviously this is a victimization situation, and I would love to know if any of the people who've perpetrated this, do they get arrested, do they face consequences? Has any of the legal arm, police or anyone of that nature gotten involved to rescue the people who are victimized?
Sadly, no. Vivian, the percentages of convictions for elder abuse are extremely low. I want to alarm your viewers because I want to shock them into action. I've investigated over 400 fraudulent guardianship cases around the country. What you see, not one, actually, let me take it back. One of those cases has actually yielded a criminal arrest and has yet to yield a criminal conviction.
Why?
Because
Why one out of 400?
Law enforcement doesn't engage in this area. I've talked with sheriffs around the country, I've talked with district attorneys around the country. Our law enforcement experts deal with violent crime. When someone is murdered, when someone is beat up, when someone is raped, those are the cases that they focus their resources on. Reporting the theft of an 80-year-old person by their son or their daughter, or even, even further out, their guardian, it just isn't an arena where law enforcement engages. It's a sad reality.
But what about when you said that these guardians, who could be potentially strangers to this elderly individual, now withholds the family member having access to them? Isn't that abusive? So why wouldn't there be a step in by the police or any other judicial arm to stop that kind of an abuse simply because someone's aged? I mean, you help children under the other organizations. You mentioned there's organizations to help the elderly. Why isn't something being more proactively done, since this is criminal? Abuse is criminal action, correct?
Vivian, everything you're saying is correct, but the reality is our society, look, I'm a Christian man. I wear my faith deep in my soul, but I also recognize our society today really doesn't care about the elderly. There's a lot of rhetoric on it, but if you look at child protective services, if you look at federal laws that protect children, those could easily translate to the elderly, particularly the elderly that have become vulnerable due to disease or illness or accident. It doesn't translate. 1986, the Associated Press did a study on 2,200 guardianships around the country. They did a series in the New York Times and other newspapers. It was appalling what they learned, the abuse that went on, the lack of oversight in these guardians once the probate court, the judge, assigned a third party, oftentimes a stranger, to protect that individual. This is the most vulnerable in our society, and judges step in to give a third party power over them and then don't demand oversight and accountability.
So that's the key. Oversight and accountability is what we have to start establishing.
Absolutely.
So families need to kind of like treat their loved ones as a business. You have to have contracts in place between family members, and it's got to be enforceable.
Ron, that's a great idea. Very difficult to put in practice. Most families won't sit down and have that intentional of a discussion. My guidance to family members is have the discussion on who of your children. Look at history. Cain and Abel was the first family fight. Okay? The beginning of time.
We've had 2,000 years ago.
That's right. We've had issues. Well, more than that. I mean, this goes back to the Old Testament.
That's because they didn't hire an attorney.
Please don't say that, Ron. But no, family dysfunction is normal. But that's why we as parents make an assessment of our children, of our siblings, so that we decide who is best able to protect me, who is best able to care for me. Those documents, once they're drafted, and my personal guidance to all families is don't go to the court. That environment is far too unpredictable. So execute your durable power of attorney, execute your advanced health directives, grant it to the person you trust the most, put in a successor, so that you have some backstop protections, but do everything up front to ensure that you never have to give those decisions over to a third party. Because go ahead.
I was just going to say is we need to cut you off, because this is such an important topic. Who in our viewing audience doesn't have an elderly person in their life that they care about, they love, or at least friendly with? And the information that you learn here, you not only help your family, but the people you're in contact with. So we did something very, very special. We are freezing here, so we can ask you to stay tuned and come back for the second episode, which is actually the second part of this valuable subject that you need to hear about. Stay tuned for part 2 of guardianship abuse of the elderly. And returning will be Rick Black,
Rick Black
and
and Juliette
and
Farley.
Juliette Fairley.